Hi everyone, my name is Brooke from Axis of Perdition and a million and one other weird heavy metal bands that you've probably never heard of. So today I'm going to remix Disturbance in a Perpetual screen from the debut Axis of Perdition album, Ichneumon Method and Less Welcome Techniques. But first I've got to tidy up the original session so I can export these files so you lot can have a go at them and so it's easier for me to mix. Because back in 2002, we had no idea of how to organize a recording and mixing session. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and reorganize that session and then export all of the bits out so that we can work with them in Reaper. And then so you can download them and using the link below in the description and then have a go at mixing it yourself. So here we are now in Reaper. What I've done is I've gone through the original session that was in Sonar Cakewalk and I got rid of all of the extra unneeded takes that we had. So I like to keep my sessions organized and color coded so I know where everything is and what everything is. So starting from the top, I have a mix bus and everything goes through the mix bus. And then I have each set of instruments running into a folder. So in Reaper, your folders are also buses, and a bus is basically a track that allows you to channel lots of separate tracks into one stereo or mono track. So I take advantage of that, and I put all of the vocals, all of the guitars, etc., all of the drums, and each one of these might have a sub folder and bus in it. So if you look in the guitars here, I've put all of the guitars, all of the distorted guitars through one bus, so I can process them together. And all the clean guitars through one bus so I can process them together, and then they all go through a separate guitars bus folder. I also put the ambient tracks, which is the delay and the reverb I add to things, through their own bus. So if I need to automate them like I did here, I can do that. And I tend to have use the same set of colors for the same types of things. I've also gone through and labeled all of the tracks properly, apart from here where I forgot to. So again, I can see where things are easily. So all tracks are routed through this mix bus, that's this one here. And then that goes into the master bus, which connects to my output. So my master bus here which has everything going through it. So this is the actual, what you would hear when the tracks mix down. And what I've got on there is an L1 limiter, and that's just to stop any clipping and just so I can bring it up to a sort of a regular listening volume instead of having it being really quiet. So what I've done while remixing it is I've used all of the original sounds. I haven't added any new sounds. I've just used the new techniques and things that I've learned over the last 18 years since we originally did this song to remix it. So let's go through now and look at individual instruments, and we'll start with the drums because they tend to be the foundation of a mix in metal. So here's the original MIDI drums. These were using sound fonts I think the sound was called Replica, and it was attempted to replicate the sound from Fear Factory's The Manufacturer album. Unfortunately, they're in mono, which is only something I noticed now 18 years later. Oh dear. So all the drum MIDI was programmed by Mike by hand. So here it is in all of its dirty glory. And if you go through and look at this when you have a go at mixing it yourself, you'll notice that there's some really weird decisions he made. And that was because to get things to sound good, for example, like a ride cymbal, we had to combine the ride shoulder and the bell to get like a good ride sound, but obviously we don't need to do that now. I've cleaned the MIDI up a little bit. There were some parts where cymbals had retracked against toms, so there were random tom hits sticking out here and there, like these places. But now they've been retracked against so that they're hitting actual cymbals and not just random tom hits. we didn't really understand what velocity was in 2002, so we basically used the velocity to try and get the drum to sound good, and inevitably that meant setting everything at 127, which is the hardest velocity. So if you don't know when you're programming MIDI drums or MIDI instruments, velocity is how hard the instrument is hit or played. And if you want it to sound like a robot or a machine, then yeah, set everything to 127. But if you want to replicate real drums, then you need to set things lower. So a lot of these I've reset to around, 110, which is like a pretty hard hit. That's a kick drum. And that's like a drummer sort of hitting the drum fairly hard, but still within the realms of what a regular drummer would be able to do. So Axis drums were never really trying to replicate a human, because there's lots of things in here that a human couldn't play because we don't have enough arms. So we were trying to get halfway between a real drummer and some kind of robot octo drummer, both in terms of the tones and how hard things were hit and how the drums were actually played. So let's go and have a listen to those drums now. So we're using Superior Drummer, and it's an easy drummer pack called Metalheads, and this is the drum kit. Is played by Thomas Hark from Meshuggah and then mixed by Daniel Bergstrand, who's also produced a mixed load of Meshuggah stuff, and it's the kit that was used on Meshuggah's Obscene album. So I chose this one because it had the sort of clicky roboticness that you would get that we had in those original MIDI drums, but it also has the benefits of being an actual real drum kit. And so the tones are a lot better, and also it's in stereo, not mono, and a much wider array of cymbals. And it's been well played and sampled and produced, so half the work's done for me already. And we've got this routed coming out using the internal routing so that all of the kick drums in Superior come to one kick drum in Reaper, one fader. All the snares go to a snare fader. Hi-hat goes to a hi-hat fader, although I ended up not using the hi-hat. Each tom drum goes to a fader, and then stereo outs for the overheads and the ambients, which go to their own faders. And you could separate this out. If I wanted more control over it, I could separate each individual bit of the kit out into its own fader, like the snare top and the snare bottom and the snare trigger sample. I didn't want to do that because it sounded good as it was. So one of the ways that I mix is, rather than trying to use one single EQ or one single compressor to do all of the work, what I'm doing is I'm using like several passes from a multiple compressors and multiple EQs, for example, to get the sound that I want. So all of the drums go through a drum bus, and the toms get grouped to one fader so I can control them easily, but are generally mixed individually on their own with their own effects and things as well. So let's go through and look at what I'm doing on each individual part of the kit. So first we've got the kick. So that's without any effects on. There it is with some effects on. So the Easy Drummer packs come with effects pre-applied to them. They're kind of semi-pre-mixed, but I always like to add my own little bit because they're never quite 100% what I want, but they're kind of like more than halfway there. So the first thing I do is I've got some EQ rolling off all of the low end below 80 hertz. So most of the low end in the mixes like this I get from the bass guitar. I'll cut off everything below 80 hertz, but I put a little bit of a bump there using the bandwidth on the EQ. So let's just listen to that. You can hear there's a lot more of the sub energy in the before I roll it off. I'm doing a cut here as well, because this sounds a bit around this area. It's a bit, makes it sound like you're hitting a box or something. And then I've cut off the really high end there. This high end's where I want the cymbals to live. So I'm trying to get everything out of there where that doesn't need to be up there. So this first EQ mostly just does cutting. And you could do cutting and boosting at this stage if you wanted to, this is the way that it's easiest for me to remember it, to do it this way. So next up we've got some compression. I've got 15 millisecond attack there, so I'm letting the transient go through and then an auto release, and then I'm bringing, so the transient goes through and then it's squashing the signal after the transient, but then I'm using the output controller to make that louder as well, so you get a thicker and more dense and compact kick drum sound. So I'll listen to it with and without. You can feel that and hear that thud in it. It comes out when we turn the compressor on. Okay, next we've got this. So these are both stock EQ and compressors that come with Reaper, and I use a lot of the stock plugins because they sound fine. This next one isn't a stock compressor, stock plugin. This is the Waves Ssl Channel strip, and I'm using this as both an EQ and then the compressor at the end. Okay, so again, rolling off all of the lowest stuff below 80, because that's not what we want. We want to get that out of the way so the bass can live there, and then rolling off all of the high end so the cymbals can live up there. I've added 4 decibels at 3.5k, so you can hear what difference that makes to bring out some of the attack. I don't like it too super clicky like this. If you bring up with the 8k, I like the attack further down. And again, I've rolled off more of the muddy, woofy, boxy stuff down here, and that's about, where's that? That's about 500 hertz. Got that out of there, and then I've done a wee boost at 80 hertz to bring out more of the low end, and I've set that to a bell rather than a shelf. And then we've got the compressor on there, and that's doing like 3 to 6 decibels, I guess. And then, and again, that just makes it more compact and dense. So if we take that away, just gives us a more compact, dense snare with lots of like weight and smack behind it. So that's the original sound without the plugins, and there's with the plugins. And then the last thing we've got here is a clipper from GST. It's a GST clip. I use this all the time on all kinds of drums and transient things. And this is a soft clipper, and what it does is it clips the top of the signal, but it does it in a pleasing way. Rather than getting horrible digital distortion, we get a nice consistent sound, and it kind of increases the perceived volume without actually increasing the literal volume of it. So let's listen with and without. So that's the kick drum. Move on to the snare now. So without EQ and without the effects, it's still a nice snare. So what did we do here? So again, taking out everything below, say, 160 on this, and then getting the high end out of the way, the cymbals again. A little dip around 500 to take out some of the boxiness. Sounds like someone knocking on the desk, like that. And then not really adding anything at this stage. Adding a couple of dB to bring the around 300 hertz, because you get there's some nice stuff down there that can stop a snare drum sounding sort of nice weight down here in the snare drum without weight. And if you take too much of this away, your snare drum just ends up sounding like someone hitting a sheet of paper. Actually, that sounds quite good. I'm going to move that up to there. Cool. And some compression. I had to turn this up quite a bit because the snare sample was quite, and again we're doing our attack, slowish attack, so we can get the transient to go through, auto release again. Doing between 4 and 6 dB of compression. And it just gives it more density, weight and force behind it. So you get that feeling of something being hit rather than like with force, as opposed to a bit of paper or a bowl of mashed potato being slapped, which is what snares can sound like if without compression. Next we've got the Ssl channel again. So again, rolling off the lows that I don't want and the highs. Put a boost around 8.5K to bring out the sort of smacky high end of it, the sizzle, I guess you could call it. It's easy to use too much, but just wanted a little bit of that sizzle in there, the snare wires. Didn't really do anything down here in the middle, high mids. And low mids, we took out some more of that middle. And then we added a few dB down here in the bottom. Where that thick, weighty part of the snare drum is. I explained good. And then more compression. So it's just tickling the light there, just sort of triggering it. But you can actually, if you listen carefully, you can hear how it's getting compressed. And it's getting compressed more than it says on the lights. I didn't really need to compensate on this one. And then the last thing is another compressor. And this one's a model of a hardware compressor. And again, you can hear how the compression is working on this. I'm not doing a huge amount of compression, but it's all adding up. We're all getting all of these layers. It's giving the weight to the snare density and force, like you're feeling something getting hit hard as opposed to just wafting at a bit of paper or something. So there was plenty of hi-hat in the overheads and the ambient, so I didn't bother using the direct one. And the next thing I did was the toms. So I'll only show you one of the toms because I did pretty much the same thing on all of them. I just adjusted it because some toms are higher and lower. So there's the toms without any effects on them. So EQ again, getting out the middle end, getting out the highs and the extreme lows. And again, it's a subtle effect. But what we're going to do is, as with the other drums, everything's going to add up. And we've got compression. You can see that really brings out the weight and the density of the drum. And again, letting the transient through using an auto release, and then bringing up the overall volume. So we've got that kind of weight and density to the drum again. Use this fancy fab filter now to do some additive EQ. So we're trying to bring out the fundamental note of the drum. Some of the mids and the high mids, just to like calm them down. Not bring them out completely, but just control them. And then a boost at the high end here to bring out the attack and the click of it. But we're still keeping clear of this area where we're going to put the cymbals later. And finally, another one of these compressors. Just to give it that extra attack, weight and density and feeling of thickness. So what you end up with is what sounds like a instead of this. Like these lower drums, without the effects, these lower drums, even though they're really nicely recorded and played, the samples still sound a bit farty when you play them all together. Whereas now they've got weight to them, they've got density, and you can hear the actual note definition a lot more. So we've got them going through all together into a bus, and then we've got this compressor on there to help glue them together so that they come together as like a set of toms as opposed to individual drums floating in space. And then just this L1 limiter just to stop them clipping basically unwantedly. So let's look at the overheads now. So the overheads are the cymbals, but also they kind of give you a big picture of the kit because they're looking down on the drum kit. So you can use them to fill in space between the shells and really bring the different parts of the kit together into a cohesive unit. Let's have a quick listen to these. So you can hear it's picking up a lot of the snare and the kick drum as well. So let's hear it with the effects off. So the first thing we've got is this limiter to squash everything. And what I've got this set up to do is, in case there's any rogue snare hits that pop up or tom hits that pop up and make it sound weird, it's just to keep that under control, not really to shape the sound of the cymbals themselves. So next thing we've got is EQ. So we're rolling off a lot of the bottom end all the way down to 200-300 Hertz. And then some of the really high fizzy stuff at the top that doesn't really help the sound. It just sounds like static. Just listen to that going on and on, turning it on and off. Gets rid of a lot of the low end rumble from there, the kick drums and the toms. And we also have these big sharp dips here are for resonances. So sometimes you get resonances in the sound, and it's like a note that doesn't go away or doesn't change, and it's really annoying. And even if you don't notice it directly, you can always tell that it's there. So I've just used these to get rid of that. So you can hear that kind of pocky sound. Quite often it'll sound like sleigh bells, it reminds me of. And you notice it more once it's once it's been removed. So we've got this compressor, and that's doing a little bit of a squash just to kind of reduce the dynamic range and give the cymbals more density, and then give the actual cymbal crashes themselves more sustain, so that they hang out, so they ring out more as opposed to going ksh and being gone. And we've got the SSL again. Rolling off all of the low end, rolling off some of the extreme highs. Putting a boost around about 10k. Just to bring out the high end in there and the articulation in the sounds. Rolling off around 3k. So we don't really need that. That's the stuff that sounds like sleigh bells, and not doing anything down here with the lows or low mids. And then again some compression there. So even though it doesn't light up, it is actually doing some, just to bring the sound all together. Last part is the ambient mics, the room mics. These will be placed away from the kit, looking towards it, and they're trying to pick up the sound of the whole room. And you don't have to use ambient mics, but these can add sort of life and energy to your drum sound. So I've included them here. So starting with rolling off all the lows and all the boxy sounds around here, because we don't really need that. And then the high again, because we want to keep that out of the way of the cymbals in this case. You could use you can use the room mics however you want. You could use it to add in low end and some of this stuff, or extreme highs, but in this case I didn't want to. Anyway, we've got some compression, so that's just keeping everything balanced. So you can actually be pretty brutal with these and really crush them with multiple compressions to really get that room energy out of them. That's kind of what I'm starting to do here, and again bringing up the volume as well. Still letting some of that transients go through, but not as much as on the Ssl direct mics. And we've got the Ssl channel again, rolling off the lows and extreme highs. Boosting some of that high mid range, because that's a little bit missing from the rest of the kit from the direct mics, because I've took a lot of it away because in the direct mics it didn't sound good, but here it does. Another boost in the low mids, 250 Hertz. Actually, I'm going to drop that down a bit. I don't like how it sounds anymore. So you can always change your mind as you go along. And there's a little bit of compression going on. Even though it's not lighting up, you can hear that there's a little. Just smoothing out the edges. And then finally we've got this compressor again. Which is doing a little bit more compression, and then we're boosting it as well, the volume. So we've got this really overblown, heavily compressed, boosted sound that adds a lot of energy. So let's listen to it now. I'll take the ambient mics in and out. So start with them off. On. So all of our drums then go down to the drum bus where we've got this, I'm using this compressor called Mollet, which is just doing a little bit of compression to squish everything together. So there we go. There's on extreme settings. So just a little compression on the end. So we've got some buses here. We've got the snare and the toms going to a long and a short reverb. It's here. And for that I use Softube Czar EQ, which I think sounds really cool, and I got for free. And I've got one's short and one's long, which I find mixing EQs, mixing reverbs like that gives you a nicer sound than just trying to use one reverb to do all of the work. And then they've got these EQs on them, so they're not using up much high and rolling off the low end to clean up the reverb sound. So that's the reverb without the EQ. And there's the reverb with the EQ. It's cleaned it right up. Okay, so that was the drums. And then next we've got the bass. The bass was one track, and it was recorded with the effect baked in, so the distortion. I think there's even a bit of reverb there for some reason. Who knows? It was 18 years ago. It was a different time. We didn't know what we were doing. What I've done now is I've copied that track, and one of them is only dealing with the high end and one of them is only dealing with the low end. So this is the low end bass. So we've got EQ, and that EQ is just rolling off everything above 500 with a little bit of a dip around the lower mids where it was getting a bit weird and muffy. And then I've rolled off everything below 60 because I want the bass to live below the kick drum in terms of the EQ spectrum. And then I've got L1 limiter, which is just crushing the hell out of the low end, making sure it stays fixed in place so there's no movement in it whatsoever, because this is like extreme metal with a super dense mix, so you don't want a really dynamic bass. I wanted a really solid, steady, thick bass that's going to stay in place and do what it's told. And then on top of that, I've got this compressor here that's side chained to the kick drum with a fast attack and release, and that just ducks the bass down ever so slightly whenever the kick hits, and helps to get the bass and the kick to sit well together. So for this upper bass, the clanky bass, although it's more fuzz in this case, I'm using JST Bass Forge with those settings. The pedal isn't turned on. Clanks all the way up. Cut out everything below in the internal EQ below 400. Compressing it quite a bit. And then using an external EQ to cut off everything at around 500. And then so we can mix them together. So we can control how much clank we've got and how much actual bass we've got. And then they're bussed together so I can control all of them with just one fader. And even though this time it's like an 18-year-old bass track on a not very good bass guitar that wasn't set up properly, played by me, who's not a very good bass player, I would use a very similar technique to mix a bass if it had been recorded nicely now. And it sounds okay. Nice and dirty and industrial sounding. So next up we've got the guitars. So there's one individual guitar track. So we went into there's another video linked below where we have a discussion about how we actually recorded these, but it was a Zoom 707 or 705 multi-effects pedal into a PV bass amp, mic'd up with a karaoke mic, which was basically a fake SM57, which was sellotaped to a measuring jug, which was sellotaped on top of an animal hide drum, because that we didn't have any money to go and buy mic stands. And then a biggie smaller, we called it, from a 1/4" jack into an 1/8" jack, or whatever it is, to go straight into the back of a Sound Blaster Live. Or we might have had the Sound Blaster Live with the front box interface by this point. Either way, it went straight into the computer, the mic signal, with no pre-processing. So this guitar tone is baked in. We had no DI. We didn't even know you could do DIs at this point. So we recorded 6 separate guitar tracks. So there's this one, doing the arpeggio. That one doing chords and arpeggios. That one doing chords and arpeggios. And that one doing chords and arpeggios, so it was just the same part played on top of each other, and all of the minor variations from the happy accidents in picking style give it this thick, claggy, nasty sound that we liked. And then finally we've got this part here which goes up the middle, and that's just playing the chords and the bass notes to thicken it up. And I think we got that idea from reading an interview with Metallica, and apparently James Hetfield does this. And so together the distorted guitars all sound like this. Nice. So what are we doing on the guitars? Well, that was an absolutely, they were a terrible guitar tone, mic'd up badly with crappy gear. So I had to do some pretty extreme EQ on there. So rolling off everything below 130, everything above 10k, because that's where we want the cymbals to go. And then there were some horrible room resonances in this area. So I'll just boost them so you can hear what it sounds like. So this is without the EQ. And with the EQ, vast improvement. Still not the greatest guitar tone, but it's pretty unique. And we can't completely remove that resonance, but we can at least tame it so that it's not taking over the guitar tone completely. And then next up we've got fab filter again. In the same area, using the dynamic EQ to just push that back down, that resonance back down whenever it pops up too much. And that's it for the rhythm guitars. So even though they were recorded so badly with such cheap, horrible gear, it actually turned out into quite a cool guitar tone. Like I said in the other video, I wanted it to sound like The Manufacturer or City, but instead we ended up with something unique. So necessity is the mother invention, as they say. Over here we've got these clean guitars. And again, these were recorded, I think, with the Zoom pedal, or maybe we chained up a bunch of different effects pedals because we had the Zoom 707 and then a Digitech RP7. So I think we might have chained them together to get that really cool, to get that particular clean sound. All of the delay. So me and Mike have an ambient project that kind of predates Axis called Pulsephere that was mostly done with guitar loops using loads of reverb and delay with a massive decay time. And so we use that a lot on Axis to give it that kind of particular sound. Let's have a look at the EQ. So I ended up with this extreme camel's hump kind of shape, and to really clean up the sound, but it sounds pretty good. And then compression just to hold it in place because the chords were really jumping out. And then bring the volume back up as well. And then they're mixed in underneath. Really helps to give those guitars some extra texture, makes them feel kind of slidey and a bit slimy, which is really cool. Okay, now let's have a look at the vocals. So I've never ever been happy with my voice. I'm a pretty crap singer, both in terms of my screaming and growling and my clean singing. So I've always been the singer out of necessity because there was no one else around to do the job. Like literally no one wanted to. And then it's kind of become part of the sound, I guess, as time's gone on. But I actually hate the way my voice sounds. At the time, I got around this by running my voice through effects pedals to make it distorted and nasty and with loads of delay and reverb on. And those effects were baked in. So that's what we've got to work with at the moment. So let's have a listen to what these sound like. So what have we got here? Well, just an EQ. They're already pretty heavily compressed from the pedal and the effects that they were going through. So we just needed to clean them up a little bit. And again, it's pretty subtle, but it helps them fit in with the rest of the music better. The real thing that helps the vocals as well is all of these different delays and reverbs we've got on there. So we've got this really short delay. It's like a slapback delay. And then the standard EQ roll-off. And then we've got this long delay. So that was a Waves H delay. And we've got this long delay using JST SAW, which is, I really love this for ambient textures. It's so cool. And then together they sound like this. I always get much better results with these kind of ambient effects when I'm mixing them together. So if you're stood in a real space, you're not just hearing one reverb, you're hearing all kinds of interacting reverbs and delays and sound reflections. So you get a much nicer, richer and easier to deal with if you mix your ambient and time-based effects rather than trying to just get one to do all of the work. Okay, and then as well as that, we've got this very short reverb on there, like a room ambience. And together it sounds like this. And that's the same short reverb that the drums go into as well, that the snare drum and the toms go into. And it kind of puts them all in the same space. I also should have said the ambience and the ambience and the overheads also go into this long reverb. Cool beans. So there's not much more to say about the vocals. It's a very different approach than I would take when I'm recording vocals now, but they sound cool and unique, and that's what's important. It's not, they don't need to sound perfect. They don't need to sound good by modern standards or anyone else's standards. It just has to sound cool and work with the song. Let's move on to synth and samples now. So I group synth and samples all together, and they all go through this one. There's various sub buses depending on the part, but they all go through this one master bus, one synth and sample bus, and that is just to stop them from any unwanted clipping or noises jumping out. It doesn't really do much other than that. Okay, so in this first part of the song, we've got these weird orchestral synths and these organs. Spooky organ. No guessing what SH stands for in those. We'll have a listen in a second. So this is a synth that goes underneath most of the song, and this is something we did with all of the songs on this album, and I think we did it on other albums as well, in that there's always a kind of synth drone or really basic synth part that follows the bass part that goes underneath all of the bass guitars and rhythm guitars. So the only thing we had access to was a really cheap Yamaha keyboard with basic MIDI sounds, and then these sort of advanced MIDI things called sound fonts. And this is a sound font called Blood War, I seem to remember. Again, we talk about it more in the other video. So I haven't really done much to this. Compressing an EQ. So the EQ is to get rid of bits I don't need that are going to be used, like we don't want any bass. That's the bass guitar and kick drums down there. This area is the low end of the guitar. This area is the upper end of the guitar, and put a little bit of boost there before dropping it off to get out of the way of the cymbals. And that boost just helps it cut through a little bit in the dense mix. I say cut through. We don't really want it to cut through in the way other instruments would. It's there to support other instruments, not necessarily be a sound on its own. And then same with the with the I forgot what it's called now. Compression. Same with the compression. This is there to pin it in place. So those horn parts of the sound jump out, and we wanted them to like smooth them out. So I've gone about it compressing it the same way I would percussion, like the drums. We're letting a bit of the attack sneak through, but then squashing the tail and then bringing up the volume of the tail to give it a thicker sound. So this is with effects, and then without. It's not one of those sounds that you hear really directly in the mix, but you notice when it's gone. It's just adding texture that kind of fits in between the guitar parts. And then we've got the spooky organ that comes in. And again, just to shape the sound, get it out of the way of other instruments, and get out some of these nasty. There was some nasty resonances here. That hurts my ears, so I don't want it there. Not in a good way. And again, that's not something that's there to be a prominent sound. It's there to support everything else, to give it and to sit underneath and create a really uneasy, weird vibe in the song that you can't quite place. So the Blood War synth goes up the middle, and then I've got this one panned off to one side. So one of the ways you can make things sound bigger without having to resort to things like stereo wideners and effects like that is to have different sounds on different sides. So we pan the guitars hard left and right, but then having different synth sounds on and samples on different sides really helps to kind of make it sound larger, because there are differences there, and that's what attracts the ear, I think. So then we've got these sounds here, the SH sounds. So there's this one. Pretty abrasive sound, made by playing that cheap Yamaha keyboard through a guitar pedal. And then some EQ to kind of smash it in place, and again get rid of those horrible resonances. And then this one plays a bit of a melody. Getting the stuff out of the way of the bass and the cymbals, calming it down with the low around here in the low mids. So we play them together. And again, panned hard left and right, so we've got two different sounds going on the far sides of the stereo image. Cool beans. So that's like the first part of the song. Now we've got this first ambient section, and I've bussed all of these things into their own little group so that I can deal with them on one fader after balancing them amongst themselves. So let's have a listen to that. I've also just processed them all together with EQ, compression and limiting. And again, So I've EQ'd these using a little bit differently because there's nothing else going on at this time, because there's no guitars and drums and things for them to fight with. Don't really have to cut away too much of the noise. Don't have to. So all I've done is take out the extreme subs, which didn't sound very good, and then I've put a low pass filter there, rolling off a lot of the high end. So even though there's no cymbals here, I wanted to make it sound a little bit duller, so that this section contrasts with the sections that come before and after it. So it makes a much more stark change. So it creates a bigger contrast and there's more impact when the next part of the song comes in, and it creates dynamics in the overall song, which is what we wanted originally, but just didn't know how to do it. So I've got a compressor on there just to squish things together. And it's not doing too much work. It's just some parts of this are louder than others and stick out more. And it's just to kind of like gel them together more. And then I can't remember why I did this with the limiter, but it sounds good, so I'm leaving it. So the distorted crashing sound I've got here, that goes to the long delay, and then the whole little group from this section goes to the long reverb. So just to give it a sense that it's in a space and that it's distinct from the sections that music that went before and the music that comes after. Oops. Our next little bit is this sample. And again, we want to create contrast between the different sections. We want to create dynamics. And that's what makes music interesting, because if it's just one solid wall where everything's as loud as and intense as it can be, then nothing will be loud and intense. So we've got this really loud part with all the guitars. And all I've got on the sample is L1 just to crush it, and then that goes to a reverb and a delay. Might take that down a little bit actually. Okay, then this section's all of the chaotic noise that happens in the middle. We've got two different samples here, but each of these sounds is a bunch of samples that were smashed together back in the day. So we've got all of this screaming, which is a load of different samples taken from various sources and squashed together to produce this one noise. And then we've got this one. So no prizes for guessing where we sampled that from. And again, there's other noises in there, so it's not just like one sample, it's a load of stuff squashed together to create these two combination sounds. And what I've done is I've added some saturation, some distortion to them to make them nastier, messier, then crushed them with a limiter and put bit speak on this one. Turn that up a bit, which just to make it sound even nastier. And then they're going into this bus here, which has D-Blue glitch on it. And then crushing them again in another compressor, and then delay and reverb on it. So we wanted to recreate the sound of how on the original recording everything kind of broke up, and we were like, oh man, we've made something so evil that the speakers can't handle it. It's like a whole other universe trying to crawl out through the speakers. And what it was digital clipping, because we'd normalized everything. So I've tried to recreate that in a controlled manner and in a way that sounds better, and I think that's pretty good. I'm happy with it. And if you aren't, go to hell. Sounds cool, so it's staying. Okay, then we've got this next section, the middle ambient bit. And this is basically all just guitars. So that's a guitar playing a drone into a pedal that's plugged directly into the sound card. And this is a guitar with a unique effect we made called the Tyrant, which is a combination of wah pedal, pitch shifter, with loads of delay and reverb on it. And so I'm messing around with the guitar, trying to do lots of fake whammies with the pitch shift pedal. And then I started screaming into the pickup. That's me screaming into a pickup. The guitar was an Ibanez RG, which we still have. It cost me 150 quid. It's one of my favourite guitars. And I've had it for about 20 years, although it's currently at Mike's house and strung upside down so he can play it because he's a lefty. And what's this next one? That's a keyboard going through a guitar pedal, the RP7, I think, with loads of effects on it, like a pitch shifter that's getting pushed up and down. So I think Mike was playing it, and then I was using the expression pedal to make the noise go, the pitch shift effect. And they're going into one bus, which just goes to a reverb. And then here right at the end, we've just got this sample. So nothing happening there, it just goes to reverb and delay. And then the last two weird noises. We've got the straw cab vocals, which is this. And that's just getting sent to a long delay. So that's just lots of my vocals that were recorded through guitar pedals and then stretched and slowed down and reversed, all piled up on top of each other. So you won't be able to tell what I'm saying, because even if you reverse it, it's still going to be reversed because it was reversed in all kinds of different directions. And that's just got a delay on it. And then the last stuff is just radio static. And this is literally just an old radio that we were recording with a microphone, our cheap karaoke mic, just scanning between stations. It's like an old radio from the 70s or 80s that had an old rotary knob to scan between the different stations. And then we printed this with an effect that kind of changed the pitch a little bit, or with phase, or not phase, or flange, or some wobbly effect on it with lots of reverb and delay. Okay, cool. So that's all of the different sounds. Oh, hang on. So this noise here, the distorted crashing, was kind of drums and orchestral hits from the cheap Yamaha keyboard fed through a guitar pedal with just me bashing it, or Mike. Sounds really cool. Might have to try and replicate that. Okay, so what else have I done to the mix? So aside from all of the EQ and compression, the the main part of the mix was balancing everything out. And that's generally where I start with any other mix, is just to get a nice balance between the instruments. And then just a little bit of automation. So automated the clean guitars so they go down here. So there in the verse bit they're louder, and here they're not. Just turn them down a little bit. And then I had to automate a fade out on the drums here. So because we baked in the fade out on the guitars and other bits and pieces, and then obviously the MIDI drums wouldn't have them, the new drums. So that's that. And then just some automation to cut off the delays and reverbs at the end so that they didn't overhang in a weird sounding way. Okay, so there we go. That's how I've remixed the song. The files are linked down below, so if you want to have a go yourself, they're there. Tag us in or let us know on Facebook or here on YouTube or wherever if you do make your own mix of it. So we'd love to hear them. It doesn't have to be like a standard mix. You can make like a weird techno remix if you wanted to, or industrial or whatever. Just have fun with it. Just let us know what you do with it, because we'd love to hear it. Quick note about the files though is I've cleaned these up quite a lot. You're going to have to do your own cleaning up. So you're going to have to clean up the drum MIDI a little bit. And there's random bits of bass here and there in the ambient sections that you'll need to take out, but that's part of the fun. So I hope that you've enjoyed that. I hope that's been informative for you. I guess the last thing to do is to let you have a listen to the song. The song will be online, probably on Bandcamp and streaming platforms sometime in the near future, so you can go and download it. But let's have a listen back to it now.